G'day everyone, welcome to Key Knowledge Point 5 of Area of Study 1, so 3.1.5. Having some webcam issues, so you are all lucky and my ugly mug is not going to be in the corner of this video. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the feedback on that. Maybe that's something we can look at doing going forward, depending on reactions. Our quote for today is a Winston Churchill quote. And I highly recommend you, look up a few more of these if you'd like. Obviously, very famous British Prime Minister during World War II, and known for a lot of inspirational quotes, I suppose, and also a few that are a little bit more humorous, perhaps. And Churchill says, "Success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm." Again, like most of our quotes, very apt for year 12. It is the idea that, you are going to fail. You are going to not do as well as you want to do at different times. And you need to wear that and you need to learn from that. And if you don't lose your enthusiasm, you will eventually have success. What are we learning today? So, as I alluded to at the start, we are at Knowledge Point 5, and this is the role of institutions available to assist an accused. If we draw the lines there and just look at that in isolation, it's much like the victim's dot point and the accused, right to the accused dot point. It's one that has an including. So it's the sort of thing where we could get a question on an exam that just says, hey, explain the role of institutions available to assist an accused, full stop. And you're going to need to know in your head, it's going to need to twig you that, yeah, I need to talk about legal aid and community legal centres. But because they're specifically mentioned, we could also get questions specifically about, hey, what role does legal aid play? Or what role do community legal centres play? So we need to know them directly as well. In terms of our skills, it is only an explain skill, so we only need to, as I have mentioned multiple times, by the end of this, show understanding. We don't need to have an opinion on how good they are. We don't need to know their pros and cons. We just need to know what they are and understand that. So our essential question is, what role do institutions such as Victoria Legal Aid and community legal centres play? And hopefully in about 15 minutes you will be able to answer that. I'm going to give you, so just in terms of the structure, I'm going to look at each of them in isolation a little bit, mainly focused on their purpose and operation, a little bit more detail about legal aid, but just for starters, here they are generally. Victoria Legal Aid is a government-funded agency, okay? It is set up by the Victorian government, it is funded by the Victorian government, and its broad role is effectively to ensure that every person, every Victorian has equal access to the justice system. Now, obviously, we're focused here on the criminal justice system, and we'll get to that in a moment. But as a broad general sense, legal aid is there to ensure that we have equal access for all Victorians to the justice system, civil or criminal. Indeed, they're basically their value as an organisation is to have a society that is or that knows its rights and responsibilities and meets them, and to basically resolve people's problems. That is what they're there to do. They focus on early intervention wherever possible. This is particularly important for any civil matters that people go to them for advice in, and they'll try and actually resolve it without ever ending up in court if they can. They have a physical presence in 14 different locations around Victoria. Horsham, where I'm from, has a legal aid office. Warrnambool, where I grew up, does, and obviously there's plenty around Melbourne. So you can physically get an appointment and go into one of these locations, or they provide online service and a phone service if you are not near these locations. So you can basically get legal support anytime that they're open. On the other side of the coin, and they do a similar or serve a similar function, we have what are known as community legal centres. Now, these aren't government or aren't directly government funded. Community legal centres utilise a range of different funding sources. So they might get some money from the state government, like legal aid. Legal aid also gets some money from the federal government, definitely. But community legal centres will also source money from local government, so local councils, public donations. Often they're backed by philanthropists, so quite well-to-do people who are trying to help those who are perhaps more socially needy, and often the work of volunteers, and this is a really important aspect of them. They, like Victoria Legal Aid, have this common role of ensuring equal access for everyone, and they generally achieve this through offering free legal advice. So that's one of their key core common things across all community legal centres. Community legal centres can be either general in nature or they can be specific in nature. So there are 24 general community legal centres across Victoria. They are all separate individual institutions. They are all members of the Federation of Community Legal Centres. They come under that common umbrella. But in terms of their purposes, their operations, their employees, their board, all of that, they are individual enterprises who operate of their own steam. So 24 statewide that provide general support, and by statewide I mean just in different points of the state. So there's like a Ballarat Legal Services, there's the Fitzroy Community Legal Centre that does the Law Handbook, which is a great resource. But there's also in different parts of the state really specific community legal centres, and these offer advice and support in like niche areas. So if you've got an issue, perhaps say you are renting a property, something might happen to you guys once you finish high school, and your landlord decides that you will not get your bond back, and bonds, particularly in Melbourne, can be $1,400, $1,500 if not more. You might be able to go to one of these specific community legal centres for some free advice and say, hey, you focus on tenancy agreements. That's what your core business is. I need some advice. My landlord won't give my bond back, and they'll be able to advise you on what to do there. There's also specific ones on family violence. I know there's one for women in Warrnambool who are suffering family violence that they can go to for legal advice and support, and animal welfare. So what we'll do with both legal aid and community legal centres is the purpose and the operation, and then I have a little bit of extra stuff for legal aid. So as was very, very clear from that last slide, the purpose of legal aid is equal access to the legal system for all Victorians, regardless of your personal circumstances. That is obviously directly linked to the principle of access, which is one of our principles of justice. What we mean by regardless of personal circumstances is the ability for everyone to get legal advice, and also, if you need it, the ability to actually access ongoing representation in some circumstances, which I'll go over in more detail in a moment. What we want to make sure we focus on with legal aid, though, because this is the criminal justice system for Area of Study 1 of Unit 3, is just what they do for criminal matters. So obviously they do some education stuff, early resolution of legal problems in civil matters, but let's focus on their operation for criminal matters. So say you're charged with a criminal offence, and say it is the most common of criminal offences, like we looked at the other day. You have driven on Eastlink without a valid account or day pass, and you don't pay your fine, and you send a letter in the mail that says you need to go to court. You've been summoned and charged with that as an offence. What you might find at court on the day you turn up is, because I imagine you're not going to bother to go and get a lawyer, it's a minor matter, that Victoria Legal Aid may have a duty lawyer present at that magistrate's court who you can sit down with for, say, 15 minutes and just, get an idea of, okay, what's actually going to happen when I go into the courtroom? What do I need to do? So on and so forth. Just get some advice. That's free. If you've been charged with a more serious matter, though, say an indictable offence, and you're going to end up in the county or Supreme Court, you might think, hey, I probably need ongoing representation. I don't just need advice anymore. So key difference, advice, representation. I need representation. I need someone to come to court with me and be dedicated to helping me. What legal aid will offer is that ongoing representation to people if they meet certain eligibility requirements. What they will give you if you meet the requirements is they will give you a grant of legal assistance. Those who don't or haven't been subject to the word grant before, if you get a grant for something, often it's like maybe for some artistic purpose or whatever, it is where you are given money and that money has like a set of conditions tied to it, like a purpose. Hey, we're going to give you this money, but you have to use it for this thing. So it's a grant of legal assistance, meaning Victoria Legal Aid will give you money, and they won't actually physically give you the money, but they'll say, hey, we're going to give you a grant of $8,000 for you to get legal assistance with your upcoming trial because you meet our eligibility requirements. What then you have to do is you have to go and find your lawyer. Victoria Legal Aid will give you a list, and you have to engage a lawyer, and then you tell the lawyer that, hey, Victoria Legal Aid's paying, so on and so forth. If, say, they've given you $8,000 though, and you find a lawyer that's worth $25,000, you got to pay the $17,000 difference. Okay, so you have to find a lawyer, basically, that comes in under the budget that Victoria Legal Aid set you. If you can't, or if you fail to follow the directions of your lawyer, Victoria Legal Aid does have the right to withdraw that funding as well. What are the eligibility requirements? In order to get ongoing legal representation from Legal Aid, you must, 1, have a poor financial situation. And they don't just mean money in the bank, because you might have $25 in the bank and be like, oh my God, I can't afford a lawyer. But you own, 2 souped up cars or similar. So they'll take into account all the assets you own. They'll take into the account anyone who is dependent on you. They'll take into account your cost of living expenses to work out, do you have the ability to pay for a lawyer yourself? Maybe they'll say, yeah, you do. Sell one of your cars and pay for a lawyer. We're not going to fund it. But they'll also take into account these less quantitative measures, so more like qualitative stuff. They'll look at what your case is about. They'll look at how it'll benefit you. Like, is it going to give you an unfair trial if you don't have someone? Do you really need someone? But also this one. If, by helping you, Legal Aid can also benefit the public. And this often comes down to the idea of, hey, have you perhaps been wrongly convicted, or have you been subject to some form of injustice? And is it actually a really, really, really poor thing for society to allow you to be subject to that injustice? Do we need to represent you? Because that will then represent the public. Because no one in our society should be subject to any injustices or wrongful convictions. That's Legal Aid. As I said, government funded, operates statewide from lots of different locations. We'll shift our attention to community legal centres, which are individual entities that operate in either general or specific areas. Generally, they're all members of this Federation of Community Legal Centres. I'll link you to a website of theirs later on where you can look at their directory and their list of members. But the purpose of each of these different community legal centres is going to differ based on their operations, the area they work in. Like, for example, the Kensington Community Legal Centre, a general centre, offers free legal advice, but also does a lot of work into police accountability. Particularly because there's a large migrant population that lives in Kensington, who they believe have been subject to some police injustices. So they have a whole area of their organisation focused on police accountability. Just like the Fitzroy Community Legal Centre, again, free legal advice might represent you, but they also produce the Law Handbook every year, which is like, how big is it? Maybe 150 pages that basically, in layman's terms or simple terms, outlines how our legal system works. And they sell that. And that's a great resource you can look at. So the purpose of each community legal centre will differ, but ultimately they're trying to achieve the same aims as Legal Aid, which is providing equal access to the law regardless of your personal circumstances. How do they do it? All of them offer free legal advice, just like Legal Aid. You can rock up, you can find out some information about your dispute. Some will offer ongoing legal representation, provided you meet their eligibility requirements. But what is actually more likely or more common is that you'll go to them and they will sit you down and they will support you to complete an application to Legal Aid. They'll say, hey, you might be eligible for some ongoing legal representation from Legal Aid. Obviously, Legal Aid is generally better funded than any of these centres. So we'll sit down and we'll fill out that application together. But again, ultimately, it all comes down to the idea that equal access to everyone, regardless of circumstances. The key skill that they're asking us to do here is just to explain it. So just to show understanding. And the sort of question we might get is this. Describe the role played by institutions such as Victoria Legal Aid and community legal centres in helping an accused person for 3 marks. Okay? Again, we're going to look to make some clear points here. We're going to have to specifically mention Legal Aid in our answer. We're going to have to specifically mention community legal centres in our answer because they're referenced. And we're going to have to talk about the role they play more generally. But at the end of the day, what we have to do to get 3 marks is show that we understand these 3 things. No sample answer today. I want you to try and write an answer to this yourself. So this question of describe the role played by institutions such as Victoria Legal Aid and community legal centres. My recommendation for this would be to make some nice clear points, a couple of sentences each. Point 1, you'd probably be looking at saying, the role of institutions to assist an accused in general. So, access, advice, okay, and why that's important. Then you'd be looking to make specific mention of Victoria Legal Aid because it's in the question. So, what do they do? And then the same with community legal centres. What do they do? That should tick off the key requirements of the question, and provided you use your knowledge and show understanding, that's how you'll get 3 marks for that sort of question. In terms of the ability of the criminal justice system to achieve the principles of justice, how do community legal centres and Victoria Legal Aid help? Well, naturally, we know that they're all centred around access. So Victoria Legal Aid and community legal centres achieve access because they provide that advice to give people the understanding of what's going on. As always, I recommend stopping the video here and trying to critically think about community legal centres and Victoria Legal Aid and how they would fit into these 2 sides. And we're going to go into the next slide and I'm going to show you some clear examples in 3, 2, 1. So starting down at the access, providing ongoing legal representation to people who cannot afford it and free legal advice, ensuring people know their legal rights. That's just giving access to people. Now, that's a pretty straightforward one. It's a great one for if you need to evaluate our criminal justice system. However, you could make an argument that the strict eligibility requirements means not everyone can access legal representation. Is that actually providing you equal access? No, and there's a lot of conjecture. Legal Aid is quite open with the fact that they don't believe they're adequately funded. They believe they're very much underfunded. So they can't actually represent everyone who needs to be represented by them. In terms of equality, the eligibility requirements are the same for everyone though, so therefore it achieves equality. And they're objective. So particularly the financial situation one, meaning it's fair, meaning that if you can afford your own representation, you don't get any from Victoria Legal Aid or from a community legal centre, which is fair. It means that representation is left for people who actually need it. So it does achieve fairness there. Some further reading, so actual or hypothetical scenarios. This one is, I think, a must look at. It's a podcast called The Rulebook that I've referenced before, but there are 2 particular episodes. So they're called The Most Unpopular Defendant, episode 1 and episode 2. And I won't give away who it is because you've undoubtedly, I imagine, heard of them. But the 2 episodes look at a very famous Victorian criminal who it was ultimately found was wrongly convicted of a crime. Now, why it was a little bit controversial was because Victoria Legal Aid refused to support this person with their appeal, even though it was pretty apparent that they'd been wrongly convicted. Now, while Legal Aid never said this, because they obviously can't, there was a view that, hey, like this guy's already in prison for the next like 60 odd years, and getting off this charge might bring that down to like 55 years. Like it's a little bit obsolete. And there's this view that Legal Aid were like, you know what? People don't like him. He's a really unpopular guy for obvious reasons when you listen to it. We don't care that he's wrongly convicted. It's not good for our public image, and it's a bit of a waste of our time, so we won't represent him. Members of the legal fraternity weren't really happy with this because, in their view, it shouldn't matter who you are. No one should be in prison for any crime, even if you're in prison for another one already, if you've been wrongly convicted. And they thought Legal Aid had actually failed the public by refusing to represent him. So an interesting one. I recommend having a listen to that. Go to the Federation of Community Legal Centres website and discover if there's a local community legal centre near you. That'd be a really good one. If you can rock up to Legal Aid, like I said, near you, maybe there's a community legal centre that you can touch base with as well, and see what they provide to your local community, particularly if you're from Melbourne. Some really good specific ones. And just go to the Victoria Legal Aid website. You can find application forms for legal representation, so you can look at their eligibility requirements in more detail. You can also go to their About Us section and basically find out about their mantra. They have to report to Parliament like once a year on their business direction and their funding and stuff like that, so you can see all of the details of that as well. So some good extra reading there for you. To conclude, as always, can you answer our essential question? So can you show that you understand the role institutions such as Victoria Legal Aid and community legal centres play? Remember, if you're answering this, I want you to really, really, really dial in and focus on this idea of equal access. Happy watching. Reviews, etc. always welcomed. Let me know what you think.